Hi, welcome back aboard the Earthmote. I'm Randall. Today we are continuing our video series where we take a look at different types of dungeons that we can use in our fantasy tabletop role-playing games. By understanding these different locations that we have at our disposal, we can make more informed choices and better choices about what challenges we want to present within our campaign world or in our next adventure to our party. Today I'm going to be talking about another fantasy staple, the temple. Well, temples are often considered these large, grand places, and in most cases, we will be kind of discussing those types of temples. I'm also kind of lumping in the smaller holy sites into this discussion as well. Things like shrines, holy places, monasteries, these all have very similar ideas to the kind of big temple. They just may be scaled down a bit. So you can definitely take this information on building your big temples and apply it to those smaller locations as well. So in this video, and like the rest of the series, we're hoping to answer a few key questions. First, what is the purpose of the temple? When would we use a temple in our games? What general layouts or common areas might we expect to find in a location like that? What denizens would be residing within? What traps might they employ inside a temple? And what treasures also might be found there? So with that said, let's go ahead and get into it. The temple is designed as a place of worship and devotion. I think there also is a couple of secondary purposes that the temple might have. One being the protection of the faithful. In a lot of fantasy fiction, these religious organizations sometimes have a military bent to them. You could definitely employ that in your temple, and it could serve as a place where the faithful come when they're in trouble and they're protected by the religious order. The other option I think that you see quite often for these temples is sort of a place of containment, particularly containing blasphemous or heretical ideas or things to the faith in question. So maybe they find an artifact of their rival god or dark god that opposes their god. What do they do with it? They take it to the temple to seal it away so no one can be exposed to it, or maybe the ideas of this dark god. And that way they're kind of containing that faith within their region and maintaining their own influence over the area. When we're talking about these large scale temples, these are often major undertakings in architectural design and achievement. So this really tells us that the deity or ideals being honored within these locations are important to the societies or the groups that are building them. It's a big undertaking. It must have a big impact on their lives. So usually this is a god or a pantheon that holds kind of significant sway within the region of the lives of its followers. In fantasy fiction, these temples can be home to both holy gods, or kind of the gods you consider quote unquote good, but also dark or evil gods if it's more of a hidden temple. Sometimes they're even devoted to other immortal or long-lived beings, things like archdevils, demon princes, maybe some sort of elemental lord or archfey if they're important within that region. You get the idea. And the temple really is designed to be this focal point of worship within the region or the area. These beings are very much real within your fantasy world, and they could have a real impact on the people in that area. It kind of depends on your style of campaign. Are your gods much more active in the world? Are they a bit more distant or aloof? Either way, you could have people that come and perform these elaborate ceremonies, and there's an actual sort of divine miracle that happens because of that. That's going to draw a lot of common folk or significant following to these people that see these powers that can be beneficial to them, and they would want to come and utilize that. So these temples are very important locations within your setting if you want them to be, depending on how you've kind of set up the importance of your gods and their sort of presence in the world. I think there are two main reasons why adventurers would go to a temple in the first place. The more obvious one is probably that the temple has something the players want. This could be a holy relic or artifact that is useful to the party, or possibly some sort of text or tome of knowledge that the party needs to, continue their quest or their own goals. Alternatively, it could be something a little bit more in the form of divine guidance. Perhaps the party needs to go to the temple to speak with a high priest to get information or guidance on some sort of matter. This can be done through rituals, prayers, maybe speaking with an oracle or seer, or some other miraculous working. Could be a spell like a communal spell. You get the idea. This is sort of party needing the assistance of a high-ranking cleric or divine priest to get the information that they need. The second reason a party would go to a temple is to stop a threat. Usually this threat is centered around some sort of corruption or desecration of the temple, but it could also be maybe a heretical cult trying to seize the temple's power, harness it for their own needs. Or it could be an evil entity that has kind of taken root within the holy site and is now sort of spreading its influence, and the party's being sent there to purge it so they can stop that vile desecration. These are really generic threats that could pose a threat to the wider area around them, but definitely center around the idea of a temple if they're sort of corrupting this kind of divine influence or important bastion of civilization within a region. I think another trope that you probably will see a lot and you can use when you are kind of making these sort of temple-based adventures is the idea of maybe cults using kidnapping. Maybe they're taking villagers from the nearby area, or perhaps they've kidnapped a key figure like a noble and they're going to use them in a sacrifice to this profane ritual to their dark god. This is very tropey, but it really is a great adventure type. Gives the party a reason to go and kind of deal with this temple adventure location. And it also introduces the idea of hostages or third parties involved, which is always fun because it introduces some more interesting decisions that the party has to make rather than just smashing the door and stab everything. Temples can have a wide variety of layouts, really depending on the deity, maybe the culture that built it, and the central purpose of your temple. However, there are probably some common elements or common areas that you might want to include. So I'm going to list a few out here and we'll discuss them. First, you have maybe your entrance or gatehouse. This is often a guarded space that really marks the transition from the outside world into this sacred space, this holy place. Inside that, you might have an outer courtyard. So could be a larger area for gatherings, maybe a space for pilgrims to rest, or possibly larger public ceremonies if they need such space to conduct them. Your temples probably have these processional halls. So these are long corridors that often have some sort of religious murals or statues that flank the way. These are a great way to kind of share or show some of the mythos of the being that is being worshipped here. You probably have chapels and prayer rooms. So these are maybe side chambers, either for specific rituals or could even be devoted to minor deities or other beings in the pantheon to kind of show their respect and their connection to the central figure if it's a temple devoted to one specific god. You're probably going to have your central sanctum or your sanctuary. This is really the spiritual heart of the temple. This is probably where the main altar stands and possibly where some relics are kept, but it's really where that kind of divine power converges, either through the ceremonies or the conducting of worship. This is really the place where that probably happens for these high priests using their kind of divine power to connect with their greater being. You probably have reliquaries. So these are going to be like your treasury vaults within the temple. This is a chamber that's going to house your sacred relics, possibly an altar to the deity. If it's an active temple, access is definitely going to be restricted here. This is going to be where the temple houses really the powerful artifacts that it has. You can have communal chambers. So what I mean by this is an area where the devout could go to connect with the greater powers, possibly using things like magical conduits or sacred vision pools, or any sort of thematic element that ties to your god's domains. Priest quarters. So if it's a big enough temple, you're probably going to have living spaces for your clergy. You can include things like gardens or sacred groves. These are probably outdoor spaces dedicated to the contemplation of the deity. Again, depending on the deity that you're depicting. Your temple can definitely include crypts. So some temples might have burial chambers for important religious figures. That would probably blur the line somewhat with our tomb dungeon archetype, but there's nothing saying that you can't hybridize the two or borrow elements from the tomb for that sub area of your temple. You can include things like libraries or scriptoriums. These are going to be for the study and creation of religious texts. And lastly, you can include some training grounds in your temples. Some warrior priest orders might have areas for martial practice. This would probably also include areas like armories or other appropriate facilities for readying the devout warriors. In fantasy fiction, this is a pretty common trope, so you might want to go ahead and include some of these elements as well. Now, when it comes to designing your temples, I do think you should be giving some thought to the decoration and the symbology present throughout your temple. If you have a profile or a general idea of your deity, be sure to review that. Take a look at that. Do they have specific symbols associated with them? Do they have any mythos that you've created around them? How can you present that within the temple? That's going to make it really feel immersive, make it feel alive. You don't have to have it super deep, of course. Quick one-sentence description of what the painting is, and then that's fine. If the players want to dig into it a little bit more, you can build that out in future explorations or other areas dedicated to the god. But some things you might want to include would be things like murals, paintings, or reliefs depicting the deity's myths, miracles, or perhaps other important figures of the faith. You could also have statues or sculptures of the deity, or maybe avatars of them, or different aspects of the god. You can have inscriptions detailing the tenets of the faith, possibly prayers, or maybe other historical events related to the temple or the deity. And of course, you can include lots of symbology related to the deity. So maybe it's related to their power, their domain, favored creatures. Include lots of symbology in the dungeon dressing, and it will really make it feel immersive and distinct to the temple archetype of dungeons. So what types of monsters might we expect to find within a temple? Well, I think in an active temple, your most obvious denizens are going to be the faithful, from humble acolytes to powerful high priests. There's a huge variety in the type of followers and the different ways you could present them here. So give some thought to what makes sense for the being that is being worshipped and kind of adjust them appropriately. Other humanoids could include either heretics or cultists. Maybe they're trying to infiltrate or corrupt the temple. You could have pilgrims seeking aid, knowledge, or refuge at the holy site. You could have rival religious factions showing up, maybe seeking to undermine the temple's influence. And you could have things like temple guardians, so devout warriors that are sworn to protect the holy site. On the mundane side, I think you can definitely include animals, probably as ones associated with your deity or greater being. These would be considered sacred beasts. You might have messenger birds, or you could have creatures that are kept there for ritual purposes. Being a fantasy game, of course, we should include celestial or infernal beings in our roster, whether it's angels or demons, depending on the temple and its current status. These can definitely make a lot of sense, given whatever context you have. In some situations, we will probably also see constructs within temples. So these are animated statues or golems. They could be built to protect the sacred halls in perpetuity, imbued with some sort of divine energy, programmed to follow the deity's will. They lack the sentience that would probably make them tire of their task or abandon it altogether, which makes them really great guardians. In an abandoned temple, the denizens could be a bit different. If it's a desecrated place, you could definitely have undead show up where maybe there's negative energy or some sort of defiling magic has kind of risen them in this undeath. You could have enemies of the original occupants of the temple now currently occupying it. So maybe a demonic army attacks and overruns the God of Light's temple, and now they live there. Definitely would make sense for them to be there in that case. If the temple is so far gone and ruined, maybe it's just generic monsters that have moved in and made it their lair. That can definitely work as well. Or maybe you have a lone mad priest still clinging to the tenets and the faith of this long dead god that still occupy the ruins. And of course, you could include other adventuring groups if they're seeking the lost temple's secrets as well. All these different types of creatures and humanoids really give us a nice set of diverse characters to build out some interesting temples. Of course, you can employ and include lots of other monster types that I didn't mention, and maybe you have some interesting reasons for including those in your temple. If you think I missed any important ones, leave a comment down below and we can discuss it. Temples are likely to be defended by traps, but they're also likely to be used only in key areas of the temple. Active temples are going to have lots of staff and worshipers that are visiting the temple at any given time, so traps wouldn't be placed in those heavy use or publicly available areas of the temple. It would just be too messy. However, your faithful are often dedicating valuable offerings or tithes to their deity, so it makes sense that these valuable items would be protected by cunning traps within the temple's treasuries. Traps in a temple are often designed to test the faith and worthiness of those who enter. The devout might create trials that only the pure of heart or those who know the proper rituals could bypass. You're going to see a lot of these traps harness different divine energies to strike at would-be intruders. And if you're running a game where the deities are alignment based, then you could have traps that react to players that are of different alignment from that of the deity. So if your chaotic player tries to touch the holy relic of a lawful deity, it might go pretty poorly for them. And you can also use curse-based traps. So if the person is trying to defile or steal from the sacred and holy place, then they're probably going to suffer some sort of divine punishment for it. And when it comes to the types of traps that you might want to have within your dungeon, I'd say look at your deity's domains and the temple's purpose for inspiration. So if it's a temple dedicated to a war god, then the traps might be things like blade traps or portcullises to cut people off. If it's a nature god's temple, then maybe they use thorny vines to entangle and ensnare their intruders. If it's a temple dedicated to a knowledge god, then maybe there's some sort of logic puzzles or riddles the players have to solve in order to pass through these restricted areas. Now, in an abandoned temple, the traps might be degraded or malfunctioning, and this is really going to add a sense of randomness or unpredictability to the danger that the players are going to be facing. And of course, if new inhabitants move in, then they might also set up their own traps, which would reflect their own styles of play and tactics. So what types of treasures can the party expect to find in a temple? Well, fortunately for them, all that risk against zealous guardians and divine trials result in some really great rewards. We've already talked about how the temples are built for worship of important deities or important ideals. This means they're likely to have a lot of wealth or valuable magic items blessed by the divine or dedicated to the divine from its followers. The possessions and artifacts the party is going to find within the temple are going to vary based on the deity or ideal, of course, but here are some common elements that we probably will see show up. Divine weapons and armor blessed for holy warriors. You could find magical holy symbols, scrolls for clerics, and divine relics for the clergy. You could have offerings of coins, gems, and artwork donated by devout followers through tithe to the temple. And you could also find some art pieces that were created to honor the deity or a specific being in question. I think it also makes sense for the temple to have some surprising artifacts within its vaults. These would be artifacts of the church's enemies, maybe arcane implements if the church is known as witch hunters, or perhaps a vile artifact of a rival deity stashed away. We talked about a temple's secondary purpose being containment. This is kind of that containment aspect where maybe they're storing away these things that would be the antithesis to their religion. The vault could include things of political significance, could be regalia, crowns, or other state secrets. If the temple is an important agent in the surrounding political state, it could make sense for them to have some of these items. And lastly, the party could find ancient texts, maybe containing lost prayers, divine secrets, or heretical writings. All of these would be very interesting if they were to make their way into the greater surrounding world. Now, remember, if your temple includes any secondary shrines or chapels within the larger temple, maybe they're dedicated to a specific saint or aspect of the deity or a second deity altogether, then they might have their own treasures and reliquaries stored away in the nearby area. This offers a nice way to break up the treasure value of the dungeon somewhat and give the party different rewards for checking out different areas of the temple. And looking outside a temple's vaults, we can also offer a lot of other treasures that the party might want to take a look at. There could be gems, coins, or ritual objects of value that are offered by the subjects who have access to the more public parts of the temple, in tithe to the temple. The party could find valuable statues or paintings that adorn the walls depicting scenes from holy texts or maybe the deity's mythos. You could have gems or semi-precious stones set into the temple's decor that could be pried free by the adventuring party. And of course, you could have tapestries, rugs, and well-preserved furnishings used in ceremonies that could be valuable to collectors. These are a bit more bulky items, so maybe it's going to take a little bit more work or ingenuity by the party to get them out and back to a safe haven. So temples are one of the classic dungeon types. They're cleanly derived from real-world examples, and they just make a lot of sense in terms of being a place where wondrous treasures and divine power would be stored. Every campaign setting is likely to have some religious context to it, even if it's somewhat shallow or largely disconnected from the stories you're telling. But that does mean that you could have temples that house these powerful relics and challenging guardians and sort of a nice adventuring location for your party to check out and explore. Let me know if temples are one of your more frequently used dungeon types, and if you have any fun twists or ideas that I miss. Don't forget to like and subscribe. Check out the playlist on the screen if you want to see the other videos we've already done in the series. I'm sure more will come as well, so keep that bookmarked. Consider checking out Enchanted Nimbus, my monthly newsletter. Thanks for hopping aboard the Earthmote. I'll see you in the next one.